Welcome back to Earthspeed. Part of our mission is to capture value in everything we do and store it right where we are. And it's not just about the tangibles like rainwater catchment or the sun as power, wood slabs milled from downed trees, or pickling food for the future. It's also about preserving those intangibles like community, conversations, love, and even knowledge and wisdom through media and storytelling that we share with you. Today, we're extending this concept of stored value into the realm of money. Instead of piling dollars under our mattress or burying gold coins, what about digital currency? How can we use cryptocurrency here on the land? I sat down with Robert Breedlove, a good friend of mine, a pioneer in the space of Bitcoin, to talk about everything from Bitcoin to central banking, our relationship to money and value, environmental stewardship in the Bitcoin era, and fundamentally how we value value. Check it out. I hope you enjoy it. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Yeah, so maybe that's a great way for us to start, just our relationship to money. You know, when I was younger, hustling, trying to make money, trying to accumulate, trying to show my worth. And then at a certain point when I had enough of it, I didn't even, my relationship got really skewed because I just took it for granted.
Yeah.
And it's not until recently that I started realizing that I needed to get into a more mindful relationship to money and value, and really wrestle with what that means and how that has been programmed within me through the default education of capitalism and I guess the banks and how they want us to see money and value in the government and all these things. So, and it seems to me that you've gone through this rite of passage to really understand what money is and your relationship to it. Am I wrong?
It's an ongoing journey.
Well, because when I started that process of figuring out what is this thing we call money, what's my relationship to it? What are my latent, embedded biases?
Yeah.
What's driving me really, truly? Is it something that I can stand behind ethically, morally?
Yeah.
Or is it just an unconscious drive to accumulate more of this stuff called money? And that's one of the reasons why I got to know you, at least as a podcaster, because you have the podcast that is called What is Money? It's like, okay, so when you type what is money, you get Robert Breedlove.
That's great. I didn't know our SEO was that great. But,
Google it.
It sounds like you more consciously tried to zero in on your relationship to money, which is a good thing. I guess most of us should do that. But I never actually did that. I was taking more the philosophical approach of what is this? Like, what is it? And I had a little bit of a background in this before Bitcoin, having read the book, The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. It's about the origin story of the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. And let's just say that the book highlights the problems with central banking, and also talks about its deceptive creation and whatnot. It's a very good book. I'd encourage people to read it. Let's just say that the central bank is basically an institution for systemic theft, is the punchline. Printing money is everywhere and always stealing from one group and giving to another. So the people that are saving in dollars are being robbed by the people that can print dollars or receive the printed dollars first. There's a lot, it sounds too simple maybe to be true. And it's a pretty painful realization that the most desired asset in the world, the US dollar, is simultaneously the largest scam in human history in terms of time, energy, purchasing power stolen through inflation. It's a giant pyramid scheme. That feeling of dissonance, or I feel like it short-circuited my brain when I saw it that way. that's, I think, the introduction to like the Bitcoin rabbit hole. Because you're like, well, if the money's a scam, what other things have I taken for granted that I thought were real or are not? So
I think people, even if they have a basic understanding that it's a scam on some level, it's a justified scam in their mind. Like, oh, well, someone needs to regulate and, you know, control this for the good of the populace.
Yeah.
Because we can't do it ourselves. So some higher force, some smarter guy than I needs to come in and make sure we're okay. Joe Biden needs to come in and, you know, fix inflation or something like that.
Yeah, which is like such a fatal conceit, right? You're trying to abdicate responsibility for your life to someone else. And what did Peterson say? Something about opportunity lurks where responsibility has been abdicated. So you can't power and responsibility, right? Power over your own life and responsibility to use that power wisely. They're not separable. If you give someone the power to run your life or determine your rights to your property or whatever it may be, well, then you've given up a lot of responsibility as well, and it's probably going to hurt you. I did a podcast before I came here. It was a survival podcast, and the guy actually had a good term. He was saying that he's a dog guy, so he's got a lot of dogs. He's like, you know, I'm the master of these dogs. They're domesticated animals, and if you try to hurt me, one of these dogs would they would kill you, right? They would defend their master. And when you talk about people defending the state or the central bank or whatever, it kind of almost sounds like that, where it's the victims in the scam, I think due to a generalized ignorance about money and economics, will actually rise to the defense of the quote-unquote masters.
Or their perceived powerlessness.
Right. Yeah. You know, but it's always, the common trope is always who's going to make the roads, who's going to build the schools, who's going to do this. But all we're saying, and when I say we, I mean speaking from like a libertarian perspective, I use the term freedom maximalist actually because libertarians kind of become a political party. This is it's a non-political position. We're just saying that all human interactions should be based on mutual consent. That's it. There should never be a transaction where someone steals from another. That's what we should seek to prevent. And that's ostensibly what we seek to prevent in the rule of law and basic morality, right? Love thy neighbor as you would love thyself. But in the actual integration of our socioeconomic system, we have theft built into the money. And that, I think, is just, it's an oxymoron with really pathological consequences.
Yeah. So I think you nailed it on the head for me, because it wasn't just that I was looking for a philosophical understanding of what money is, but it started from me deciding to take more responsibility for my life and not ceding power to others to do it for me. You know, an overbearing mom that, you know, I sort of secretly enjoyed her overbearing taking care of me because I didn't have to take responsibility. My mom will do my taxes, and I can get on, you know, running amok and being, you know, a terror, and like an adolescent man. Yeah. And so as I started to realize I need to take more responsibility, it included my finances. Yeah. And then I started, I guess, seeking to understand more, like, where's my money going and how can I control it more? And then, of course, now Bitcoin comes in, and it has the promise of giving you even more sovereignty and even more independence, but it comes with great responsibility. Like, you have to actually own that charge. You can't just, it's not just this romantic thing you get to do. It's something that you actually have to work towards and be responsible for. Yeah. And so maybe just like, let's just step back a little bit, because I don't know, for the people out here in Earth Speed land who don't know who you are and why you're here and what you have to do with nature living and homesteading and Earth Speed lifestyle. And I can explain a little bit more why I think you're totally relevant, but what do you do? Who are you? And like, what is it that you are, what's your gift to the world? Oh man, that's a big question. I
kind of fell into this. I never aspired to be talking to people about the nature of money. I never aspired to be a podcaster or anything like that.
Is it the nature of money fundamentally, or is it Bitcoin?
Well, the show is called the What is Money Show, and we don't actually directly talk about money in every episode, but it's sort of centered around economics. But there's this idea, like in reality, everything is connected, right? What did the physicist Bohm called it? The unbroken wholeness. And so this more conceptual idea of money, not an economic, a less economic conceptual idea of money, might be this mediating third, right? Right, I'm speaking to you right now through air, right? Air is our medium of exchange, but not just air, also words. We're both running this open source technology called English, right? That I can assign meaning to a word, make some mouth noises, send them to your ear. You can decrypt them and get hopefully close to the same meaning as I intended to send. So that it's looking at that, this idea of mediation between kind of the unifying principles and the multiplicities that they create, how we structure human hierarchies, the duality we observe in nature, right? It's a philosophical podcast at the end of the day. And I guess we're just using that question, what is money, to kind of it's an interesting question, because I have a document with over 50 answers to it at this point that I've either picked up from reading, come up with myself, or guests have provided. And so it's not an easy question to answer. The Austrian economists would say it's the universal medium of exchange. But even that definition's sort of loaded, it's universal. Like, what does that mean? Universal in the sense of on Earth, or actually universal? And I guess to try and answer your question about who am I? My name is Robert Breedlove. I'm a guy that grew up in Tennessee. I grew up poor, actually. So I guess I had a strained relationship with money at a young age. My father was an accountant, and I went to business school not knowing what I wanted to do. And the most challenging major at the University of Tennessee where I went was accounting. So I ended up going to do that. And got my master's degree in accounting and finance. I was in public accounting for a number of years. And I was basically a career CFO. But I always wanted to work for myself. So I finally took that plunge in 2016. I moved to Los Angeles to start my own business. Not really knowing what I was going to do. I had one client at the time. It was like CFO consulting services. But it was that move that liberated the mind space and gave me the time to start looking around and seeing what's going on in the world. And that's when I discovered crypto. Now, I say crypto with kind of some trepidation because now I'm fully focused on Bitcoin. I think the rest of crypto is basically a scam.
FTX, anyone?
FTX, the most recent blow up. So, and yeah, I ended up running a hedge fund in Bitcoin and crypto space for a while. I was writing these investor updates, and then people were inviting me. My Twitter was becoming popular at the same time, so people were inviting me onto their podcast to talk about the things I had written. Not only investor updates, but also kind of longer research pieces on the history of money and whatnot. And then the podcast appearances I did became popular, so eventually I jumped on the bandwagon and decided I would start a podcast. And my first guest was Michael Saylor, who's...
Who was your first guest?
First guest.
Wow.
The most compelling speaker in Bitcoin, for sure. One of the most eloquent people on earth. I mean, he can really speak across... He's just brilliant. Not to show my own show here, but the first 9 episodes we have together, he's absolute dynamite. I take no credit for it whatsoever. The guy's so good he can basically interview himself, but that's what got my show launched out of the gate. And then, I don't know, I really thought this would be more of just a passion project, like a hobby. I didn't think there'd be a big appetite for these really niche, esoteric ideas, and well, I was wrong. I was really wrong. There's a lot of people with a lot of appetite.
And there's really no end to the topic, right? You think, oh, what is money? You have one podcast and you define it.
Right.
There's a lot of nuance to it and
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about everything
channels to go through.
from metaphysics, you know, at the extreme end on the show. I have a series with a guy named Mike Hill. We're talking about metaphysics. I mean, it's very out there, all the way to the most worldly things like, you know, what is the Federal Reserve actually doing today? So, yeah, it's a theme for the show, but it's not as strict as the name may imply, I guess.
Right. So have you had an episode that talks about the relationship between money and homesteading?
You know, not yet, but I've talked a little bit about
about right
homesteading.
How about right now?
I talked about The Ethics of Money Production by Murray Rothbard. He's a very famous American libertarian philosopher. And homesteading is how we acquire property in nature, right? We go out into the world, we find something that's not being used by others, we make use of it, we add value to it, and through that sequence of actions, it becomes ours by natural right or natural law. So I guess that's the extent of my knowledge on homesteading, is that it's very integral to the process of establishing private property.
Well, that was another turning point in my life when I realized that I was so vulnerable to the economy and my ability to go out and please others so that they could pay me for my services versus being really self-reliant in that I can fix my own, I can grow my own food, I can fix my own sink, you know, I can do things so that I'm not always reliant on others. And that's when I decided I wanted to get closer to nature and reacquire or remember some of those primitive skills or those skills that we as a culture have abandoned for big factory farms or, you know, different centralized systems. And yeah, and when I got here, I was like, okay, so people, now we save dollars in the form of zeros and ones on a screen or, you know, a Venmo app. But back in the day, we used to store value for real, like on the land. We used to store seeds. You know, we would trade our wares with each other. One person had chickens, one person, you know, had cows, and then they would trade. So I wanted to sort of get back into that more self-reliant lifestyle. Not necessarily bartering, because I think there is some value to having a medium of representation, so that, because you don't always want that, you don't always want eggs right when when someone else needs
the coincidence of wants problem, they call it.
What is it?
The coincidence of wants problem. What
Right.
you want doesn't always coincide with what they have to offer, and vice versa.
So you have an IOU, so you can trade it when you need it.
Or you have an asset that's just liquid. It doesn't have to be an IOU. It can be gold, right? Gold being that universal medium of exchange. So
gold is liquid, meaning it's
accepted, widely accepted.
okay.
Yeah.
But wouldn't dollars also be widely accepted?
Dollars are widely accepted,
Also liquid.
and dollars became widely accepted because they were once redeemable for gold.
Right.
It's almost like they
Because I
piggybacked.
always just imagine a dollar piece of paper is an IOU, essentially.
Well, it was an IOU to gold.
Okay.
So that's what the dollar originally was. If I gave you a paper dollar for chickens or whatever, it was a call option on gold. You could take that dollar to the bank at any time and get physical gold. That is called a gold-backed currency, and banks have broken that redeemability of gold in times of crisis over time. Typically, governments going to war, they say citizens can no longer redeem gold, so the government can take all the gold and go wage war. So, to your, like, barter, I guess I just need to dispel that. It's a romantic notion.
Sure.
But there's a massive economic gain we unlock when we use money, right? That coincidence of wants problem is solved. You can hold an asset that is tradable for basically anything. So you have this insurance policy on uncertainty, right? You could always hold a little bit of cash. No matter what happens, you've got the rainy day fund, you've got the nest egg. That liquid asset the utility of money is basically the fact that it's exchangeable for everything else, right? It doesn't, unlike the land or unlike your chickens or cows that are giving you something that you can actually consume of value. Money's not giving you anything to consume, it's just giving you the option on all the stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So,
right, so understanding that there is value and utility to money.
Yes.
But the way it's currently structured, like the majority of people are a slave to creating more money so that the big guy, the government, can basically take it and keep you in that sort of continuous hamster wheel.
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, it's complicated because the pursuit of money, like in a marketplace, is somewhat natural, right? You need to have, if you're an entrepreneur, you need to have a little bit of a cash buffer. You need some investments. You might have some liabilities, and you're kind of managing them. So the demand for money is natural. The demand for that liquid asset is natural, but the issue is that government has intervened and we no longer have a free market selected money. It's not the money that everyone chose for themselves, which was gold. We can get into the reasons behind this, but one of the weak points of gold is that it's not portable. You can't move it across space very easily. So if I want to have an economy that has a lot of trade, because the more trade you have, the higher frequency or the more intense trade is, the more wealth you're creating. The more
innovation.
Yes, innovation. They call this the division of labor. You can think about many hands make light work, right? So the more frequently people are trading, then the more we can engage in these longer production processes that make much bigger things that produce more wealth. So gold does not do that well. It's not fast money. It's not portable. So we abstract gold into a paper currency, and now we can move that around the world very fast. And once you turn the paper dollars into electronic dollars, it's the speed of light. So what you get, and this is one definition of money that people like, is money is a device for moving value across space and time. So gold was really good at holding value over time, right? You could not debase the supply, you couldn't counterfeit it, you couldn't inflate it. So if I parked my economic energy here, it would be here predictably into the future. The supply only increased like 2% a year. No one could counterfeit it, so it was safe, right? It was a store of value. But as money, it's very limited at moving value across space for all the reasons we just laid out. So what did we need? We needed some way to augment that technology. And that's what a gold-backed currency was. It's like, okay, gold's heavy, physical, doesn't move fast. Let's put all the gold in a safe. The guy will guard the safe, and he'll give us paper that's redeemable for gold. And now we can go and trade at a high frequency. Mm-hmm. And so that was currency's role, was like augmenting that purpose of money to move value across time and space. Gold was good at time, but not space. So gold-backed currency lets us move value across space very well. And so long as it's backed by gold, that's great, because it holds value over time and space. Wonderful, we're done here. If only it were that simple.
Yeah.
The problem is we now have trusted the custodian, right? The guy warehousing the gold, which became the bank and is today the central bank. You have to trust that individual to tell the truth. You have to trust them to only issue as much paper as they have on deposit in gold. Mm-hmm. Not to overissue the paper, not to misrepresent the assets they actually have. And across all of human history, if there's maybe one certainty that humans will engage in, it's this temptation to print money and engage in fractional reserve banking, which is to say, engage in a fraud, right? You have 100 ounces of gold on reserve, you have 100 ounces of paper circulating. No one's ever maintained that peg. Everyone always starts to issue more paper, and then eventually there's the run on the bank, right? The run on the bank is only possible when you're running a fractional reserve, when you're running a fraud. Because if you have a run on the bank in a full reserve bank, everyone just came and got their money. It was like business as usual, right? So I guess that at a high level, it's like, yeah, we need a device to move value across time and space. Gold is good at time, but not space. Currency is good at space, but not time, because you introduce the human element, the man in the middle problem. And they print the money into worthlessness. That's hyperinflation. So it's not an adequate instrument for storing value over time. And that's the problem we've been trapped in. Trying to figure out what can we use as a money that both has integrity of supply, so it holds value over time, but is also dematerialized or digital so that it moves value across space really well. And that's what Bitcoin is. Bitcoin's optimized, has a fixed supply of 21 million, the perfect store of value, but it's made of pure digital information. You can move it at the speed of light, and you can move it independently of all authorities, banks, opinions, actions, anything in the world. So you could possibly consider Bitcoin like the invention of money itself. Everything else has been an approximation of money before Bitcoin. And now we finally figured it out.
Right. Yeah. If y'all got that, I think that was a really solid explanation. At least I like to think that I understood it entirely. But so when do we get to a place where we can actually just use Bitcoin? Because it feels like there's so many shit coins and crypto Ponzi schemes and NFT, bad art that don't we need a full scale, buy-in to Bitcoin as an idea in order for it to actually truly become a currency that you're talking about, like a true currency?
Yeah, I think the evolutionary history of gold into becoming money is a good illustration for the path that I think Bitcoin will follow as well. There's a reason we often call Bitcoin digital gold. There's a lot of parallels, and actually studying the history of gold is super interesting. So people see this shiny rock in a creek bed, right? It glimmers, it looks like the sun, it's beautiful. And people start to adorn themselves with it. So initially gold is just that. It's just a collectible, right? It's a shiny thing. I like it. I put it on my clothing or my jewelry. It just so happens it has all these other properties, like its malleability, and it's basically indestructible. So it's really good for jewelry. And so that's it, right? People are just wearing gold initially, and that's pretty much all it does. There's a great essay on this called Shelling Out by Nick Szabo, if anyone's interested, which I'm somewhat drawing from here. But then, so later, this also uses heirlooms, like, because a lot of this, there was an economy way before the capitalistic, we're not really in a capitalistic economy, we can get back to that later. The modern economy, there was an economy way before that, and it used to be, you were passing wealth on via marriage, right? So a lot of this jewelry would be passed on between families of the husband and the wife, and that was a means of like preserving wealth over time, effectively. So that happens, and then we're in the agricultural age, or entering the agricultural age. So the amount of goods and services we're creating, particularly food, tends to be growing faster than, say, the supply of gold, which is very rare, right? So in that way, gold is worth more and more and more food over time, right? If the supply of gold is relatively unchanged, but the supply of food or capital, whatever good you want to put here, is going up, then if this thing is exchangeable for a portion of the capital stock, then it's a larger fraction. Its purchasing power is growing over time. So this is how gold transitions from like collectible to a store of value. All of a sudden people realize through experience and observation, wow, this gold is worth more each generation, right? It used to buy me a house, now it buys me 2 houses, whatever it may be. So it's becoming a money at that point. It's becoming a store of value. And as gold continues to store more and more value, more and more purchasing power, well, people that got gold early have an incentive to spend, right? For instance, if you bought Bitcoin at $1, and today it's at $20,000, you have a huge unrealized gain imputed into your position. That's a big incentive for you to spend. Same is true as gold is monetizing over time. People are seeing this get some more houses, more chickens, whatever the thing is. So those that get in early start to spend, right? They start to trade it. And that, as more and more people trade it and accept it in trade, you transition from store value to medium of exchange. And what I'm doing here is going through the functions of money, by the way. Store value, medium of exchange, unit of account. So finally, if it's accepted widely enough in trade, and this is one of the magic things about money, people start to think in terms of the money. We start to price in terms of the money. So now we can perform economic calculation much more easily, much more efficiently. And this explodes the division of labor, because now it's almost like a psychotechnology. So instead of something being like a physical technology, we use things like literacy, numeracy, right? These are software packages we use to connect and collaborate and be more efficient. Money sort of becomes that when it becomes a unit of account. You start thinking in terms of prices. You can now calculate, negotiate, and execute trades much more efficiently, quickly. And all of that's contributing to that division of labor that's creating more and more wealth. So I think Bitcoin will follow, I say all that arc of gold's evolutionary history to say I think Bitcoin will follow something similar. Initially, it was a joke, right? They were giving them out on the internet for free. You hit a faucet, you get 50 Bitcoin. Literally, click a button, get 50 Bitcoin. No one cared, had no market value. A guy spent, the infamous first Bitcoin transaction, spent 10,000 Bitcoin on 2 Domino's pizzas. So what is that today? $200 million or something on 2 Domino's pizzas. It's crazy. And a good lesson to never spend your Bitcoin. So it was a joke. It was a collectible, basically, right? You collected Bitcoin, and for what? It didn't do anything. It was just this orange coin project on the internet. Cool. Well, guy that's collected a few Bitcoin all of a sudden makes a trade, right? He says, oh, let me buy some Bitcoin with that. Actually, the price was set, I think it was maybe after that Bitcoin pizza trade. But anyways, once you execute a trade for something in the real world, all of a sudden you see this thing has moved from a collectible to having some value. Mm-hmm. And so at that point, it starts to be traded on exchanges, and it has a listed dollar value. So you can see a Bitcoin cost 4 cents or whatever it was when it initially launched. And at that point, it's at least partially permeated into the economic consciousness, right? It's a real asset trading against the US dollar, and it's trading around the world 24/7. So at that point, I think Bitcoin transitions to a store of value, because then all it's doing is maintaining its fixed supply, its predictable supply, let's say, while the US dollar continues to run amok, just print money ad infinitum. And so when you price Bitcoin in terms of dollars that keep increasing in supply, well, the price keeps going up.
It's a more stable investment, in other words.
It's storing value really well, actually.
Right. Better than my bank account.
Better than your bank account, yeah. Mm-hmm. And so that's the phase I think Bitcoin is still in. It's just a store of value. Now, there's not bright lines between these phases, obviously. Like I said, the guy traded with a pizza. That's a medium of exchange. I use Bitcoin to pay my vendors, those that want it. Bitcoin has settled like $4 trillion worth of transactions in the past 10 years. It's a massive number. There's a lot of transactions occurring on Bitcoin. But I think it's still in that store value phase in the sense that it has a lot of upside left, because it's a very small percentage of the market. And then finally, when people start using it widely enough, we'd actually start to think in terms of sats rather than dollars.
So you're saying its role, its trusted place within our culture can't be imposed. We have to come into it.
Yeah.
We have to, evolve into it naturally. Just like gold was eventually understood to have this value, and then we adopted it just like through evolution.
Yeah, it's an emergent phenomenon, and all good tools are that way, right? Like whoever designed this chair, it's not like some government beat them over the head and said, here's how a chair needs to be made. Right. There's been a bunch of entrepreneurs tinkering with design and figuring out what works best, what's the best tool for the job. That's what we were doing with money too. Money's just another technology, and we figured out gold was the best tool for the job.
Yes.
But because it has so much, because money can be redeemed for anything else, it's like the ultimate instrument of power. It's another definition of money. You call it liquid power. And so that draws the darkest sides of human nature, right? People, the animalistic side that will do anything to obtain power, control, wealth. So that's why money's always been kind of a taboo technology, I think. It's not even considered a technology by most people. And it's also the reason it's the domain of government, because government's the monopoly on violence. So what's the most important thing they can monopolize after violence? It's money. It's the liquid power. If you want to control people, you need to control force and you need to control the money.
I mean, I've been trying to get into right relationship with money, not naive relationship where I'm so altruistic that I'm like, I don't want any money, I don't need money, money's evil. But to recognize my potential capacity to, to fall into some, shadow relationship to money.
Yeah.
But also know how useful and how good it can be, like how useful and positive an impact it can be. So at DuContra, my impact firm, we have a saying that money is a tool, and the spirit of the tool is determined by the hand of the user.
Yes.
Right, so
tools are amoral. The user is moral or immoral. Yes.
Yes. So that is another reason why I realized I needed to get into right relationships so that I can use it for good.
Yes.
Not that it is inherently going to corrupt me, but that the corruption comes from within.
Yes.
So we must do the inner work, that personal development work, so that you can use money in the right ways, and not, become corrupted.
That's a great. I feel compelled to share with you the parable of the winemaker on this topic.
Please.
Because there is, indeed, right, a corrupt person can corrupt a system and corrupt things, but I think there's a feedback loop where actually a corrupt situation can actually corrupt people too. So that line, that Solzhenitsyn heart line, right, the line between good and evil cuts down the heart of every man, he said. I assert that it is material incentives that most forcefully move that line, left or right. I think most people, given the choice, would choose to do good. Maybe there's 1 to 5% of people that are just psychopathic and we have to deal with them. But we can't change that. We can't change human nature, or at least we don't know how yet. What we can change are the incentive structures we inhabit. So on that relationship of morality and money, because money clearly is a very powerful incentive, so it must have some influence on how this line moves in our heart. There's an author named, he's the late, great Gary North. He's a Christian libertarian philosopher. He wrote a book called Honest Money. It's available for free PDF online. It's a brilliant book. He writes very simply, very accessible, but very profound at the same time. And in his book, he gives the parable of the winemaker to describe how monetary debasement or currency inflation actually has an immoral impact on human beings. So if you imagine there's a winemaker, he sells his wine bottles for $20 a piece. And this is a very wise winemaker, so he understands economics, and he knows the central bank just doubled the money supply, let's say, to keep it simple. And so he knows there's a wave of inflation coming his way. Like the cost of all of his inputs are going to go up, so he's going to have to ultimately increase the cost of his wine. And he's working through his options, like what options are available to him. And so the winemaker's first option is that he could just keep selling his bottles of wine for $20 a piece. And he would eat that loss, right? Whatever his profit margin was would basically get cut in half, or maybe get completely obliterated through the inflation. And he would just eat the loss, but keep providing his customers wine at the same price. His second option is he can water down the wine, or he can use inferior ingredients. He can basically shortchange his customers on quality and leave the price the same to defend his profit margin. So he could keep selling it for $20, or maybe even increase the price a little bit, but use cheaper inputs so that he maintains his profit margin. His third option is to be honest and increase the price of his wine to $40, right? The money supply doubled. He'll, over time, need to increase his, I'm kind of ignoring, this takes a while to play out.
Sure.
We ignore the space and spatiotemporal effects of inflation, just say, here's where it's going. Right. He could be honest, increase it to $40, all of his input prices double, his profit margin would be the same. He treated his customers honestly, but he has to double the price. Now, if he behaves honestly, he's incentivizing his customers to look elsewhere, right? Because he just doubled the price of his wine. So if I'm a wine buyer and you double the price on me, well, I'm going to go look at your competitors, right? And see if I can find a cheaper equivalent option. Now, if then he's honest, he's driving customers into the hands of his competitors who are facing a similar situation. And if you consider option 2, that you could just water down the wine a little bit, or you could use cheaper ingredients, a lot of that's really easy to hide, right? Especially if you just do it at the margins or just a small amount. So he'd now be driving his consumers into the arms of other winemakers that have facing the same incentives. Those that would choose to water down the wine or use cheaper ingredients would actually outcompete the guy that was honest, selling the good wine at an honest price. And over time, I mean, what you're doing here through monetary inflation or monetary debasement is you are forcing individual producers to weigh their financial well-being against their moral integrity. When you have to change these prices and you have to maintain quality, when that's costing you money, people will often engage in the thing that's in their financial interest, even though it may be contradictory to their moral integrity. And so this is the problem. It's like if people were selecting money naturally and we're all choosing gold, you would never face the threat of this schism between your financial interest and your moral interest. In fact, they'd be much more aligned, because the only way you make money in a place where you can't steal from other people is to satisfy someone, right? To render some useful good or service unto them such that they are willing to consent and give up some value to you. That's how you acquire wealth in the world. But to the extent that wealth can be taken from someone else or inflated or printed, well, then that diminishes that first option. So I think the point Gary North makes in that little vignette is that inflation is kind of like a moral cancer. It's like once someone monopolizes money and starts printing it, it starts to propagate out into the economy as well, where producers now using that money are put in this kind of rock and a hard place situation between moral integrity and financial well-being.
And it's those early decisions that are easy to rationalize, right? You make, well, I'll just water it down a little bit. I'll just do a little. It's not going to be that big a deal.
And then it's easier to do more next time.
Next thing you know, you're fully corrupt, and you've already sold your soul over 1,000 cuts. That, it's easy just to do the wrong thing.
And you're full-blown snake oil salesman at that point.
Yeah, I heard that.
Yeah.
That happened to me in Hollywood. You make one little compromise, and you sell your values and for one commercial property, and the next thing you know, you're a total sellout. Hi guys.
It's real though, right? We're all trying to survive. We're all trying to increase our position in the world, right? Wealth and all of these things. Like it's the natural impulse. We're facing uncertainty, so we try to create more certainty for ourselves. Mm-hmm. But the way we do that turns out to have really radical consequences on how we actually are.
Well, and I guess I would argue, at least the way I see the world now, is how protected are you from uncertainty by having a bunch of money in a bank, which is so vulnerable to corruption and inflation and economic collapse, 2008.
And seizure.
FTX, and exactly. So are you truly safe in that? I mean, we can argue if we can never really truly be safe at all, or if that's just a neuroses. But I find that if and this is part of my work here on the land, is how do I realize that I don't need any more? I don't have that scarcity complex that's driving my every decision, but I can really just rest into the fact that I have enough.
Yeah.
And what does that really look like?
It's different for every person, I suppose. but yeah, I just, part of this whole thing, like again, money's taboo. I think it's often demonized, but it has to do with, we're talking about one of the greatest instruments for human freedom is money. Like the fact that we figured out money as a species and we could create, none of this would exist without money, by the way. This house, these cameras, this table, your $5,000 petrified wood or whatever it was, like you wouldn't, none of that would exist. We could not get to that point of economic sophistication to create these things without money. So it's a very powerful tool, but the stigma associated with it seems to be, because of its current implementation, that people are increasingly desperate, right? This hamster wheel keeps getting faster. Prices are going up through the debasement of currency. Wages are staying stagnant and flat. Mm-hmm. So the low and middle class are being taxed harder and harder. The rich are getting richer, the poor are getting poorer, and I think we're debasing civilizational integrity as we debase the money. Mm-hmm. And as we said earlier, like you're also debasing morality at the same time. So it's this, well, you talked about the corrupt man making the corrupt system. Again, the corrupt system can also make the corrupt man. There's this feedback loop between them. And us as creators, we can only really focus on the system. We can't, like we've got great medical technology and we can save some lives, but as far as I know, there's no procedure to change human nature, right? You can't like turn down the evil dial in people. It's just there. It's always going to be there. What can we do? We can focus on the system. We can engineer a better incentive system such that it incentivizes more moral actions. And that's what Bitcoin is in a nutshell. Bitcoin is just, in a punchline, Bitcoin makes theft way more expensive. You can't inflate it, really hard to steal by force. If you custody it properly, you can't be separated from it at all. And when theft is a less profitable strategy, then people will tend to engage in mutual trade, consensual trade, productive activities. And so that's what Bitcoin is, like this big incentive shift away from taking and towards making, as I like to say.
So is Bitcoin doing better vis-a-vis inflation? Is it more stable than the dollar, like just actually?
Well, the supply, yeah. So I should specify here, because this word inflation is very nebulous for a lot of people. Monetary inflation is when you're increasing the supply of money, and you can only do this when you have a legal monopoly. So you say, we can print money, no one else can print money. If you try to go start a competitor to the US dollar, you're gonna get thrown in jail, right? The guns are pointed one direction. They get to print money, you don't. You being all of us. Again, inside of a legal monopoly, inside of a central bank, there's the arbitrary increase of the supply of dollars, for instance. When I invoke the word inflation, that's what I mean. There's a central bank increasing the money supply. But a consequence of that, which is often called monetary inflation or monetary debasement, it's the same thing. You're debasing the currency, but you're inflating the supply, whatever, I don't know which term you prefer. A consequence of that is price inflation, right? Mm-hmm. Prices go up because you have more dollars chasing less stuff or the same amount of stuff. So in terms of monetary inflation, Bitcoin does inflate, but it inflates on a predictable schedule. So there's 0% unexpected inflation. And the only real problem with inflation is the fact that it's unexpected. It's like if you knew...
So just to clarify, the price of Bitcoin has nothing to do with inflation.
Well, okay. When I use the term inflation, I'm not going to talk about price inflation. So the price of Bitcoin does have to do with price inflation. So the more dollars they print, just like more dollars chasing the same amount of goods and services, causes those prices to go up. More dollars chasing less Bitcoin or the same amount of Bitcoin makes Bitcoin price go up. But in Bitcoin itself, it's what we call disinflationary. So there's new Bitcoin issued every 10 minutes. It cuts in half every 4 years, and it stops. All Bitcoin issuance stops in the year 2140. So we know...
Oh, that long? I thought it was
that long.
Sooner. Okay.
It dwindles down fast, though. I think 90% of the Bitcoin that will ever exist is already in existence. Mm-hmm. So it's less and less Bitcoin issued over time.
It's harder to mine?
Harder to mine, right. Correct. So in that sense, Bitcoin has no inflation because there's no unpredictable supply changes. It's not possible inside of Bitcoin. And the big problem in the dollar system is all these unexpected supply changes. We don't even know how many dollars they print. We don't know where they go. We don't know who decides. We don't know who profits. Like, it's a total black box.
Mm-hmm.
So in that way, Bitcoin has no supply inflation. And when you, again, juxtapose that against the dollar, which is inflating rapidly, then you get number go up, as we say in Bitcoin. And that's why the price is, whatever, $20,000 today. And it was zero 13 years ago.
Right, so it's just relative to the dollar. Or relative to
exactly.
fiat.
Exactly.
Right, and then when it crashes, it's just crashing based on the economy generally.
It's called price discovery. You know, when an asset, especially a small asset, is trading in a large market, it's very volatile. Amazon stock, years 2000, it goes through a 94% drawdown. Right, the dot-com bubble drew down 94%, and then it's come back 40,000% since. So it's the size of the asset determines its volatility.
Right. So if Bitcoin is becoming the new gold, the digital gold,
yeah,
then people need to have faith that it's going to hold its value. And if it goes down, doesn't that really undermine people's faith that it's actually holding what they've input?
Well, it does. If you're treating it with the wrong time horizon. So if you're holding money in Bitcoin like it's your checking account, and you put $1 million in, and you want to take $1 million out the next day, or 1,000 in, whatever the number is, that's not going to work for you because Bitcoin's volatile in dollar terms. But if you're treating it like a long
because of inflation.
Well, it's volatile in dollar terms because of its size too, because it's not just dollar terms. You could say, how many steaks does a Bitcoin buy you? Well, that number's all over the place too. It's because Bitcoin is a tiny asset trading in a large market. It's $0.4 trillion market cap competing for a $100 trillion market. So it's 200 times smaller than its addressable market. So what the market's trying to do, and this is called price discovery, is, well, is Bitcoin worth zero, or is it worth $100 trillion? And that moving target is the market, people buying and selling, deciding what it will be worth in the long run.
Right, and there will be a time when it will stabilize.
Yes, so as assets grow, they become more stable. Because the market's larger, deeper, more liquid, the price simply can't move as much. So Amazon, for instance, today does not draw down 94%. It's still a tech stock, it's huge, but it's much less volatile just because it's larger.
Right. So at a certain point, it will be less like a commodity, and it'll be more, because people are buying it and selling it, trying to make a couple bucks, right?
Well, not necessarily. You could also just be using it. Like, I use it as savings right now. So I only buy Bitcoin. I mean, I guess I technically spend on some of my vendors that want to be paid in Bitcoin, I'll pay them just as a, incentive, whatever, to work with Bitcoiners. But for me, my main use case is savings. I'm just accumulating as much Bitcoin as I can. And my general bet is humans are going to do what they always have done, and that's print money. And this is money that can't be printed, so every other money that's being printed in the world, the purchasing power flows into yours, effectively. Another way to think about this might be, if you're holding savings in dollars, inflation is a tax, right? Or it's theft. It's an extraction of wealth from your dollar. So, and that's true in every fiat currency around the world. My bet in general is that over time, people are going to feel the pain of that accelerating theft and extraction, and they're going to do something about it, like they already do, right?
Well, and they'll see Bitcoin stable as it is, and they'll want to have a piece of it.
Well, they might see it as their only option. Like, you can look at this through a lot of angles. So we could look at someone suffering a hyperinflation in Venezuela, and they want to get whatever pittance of wealth they have out of the country as quick as they can with as little interference as possible. So all of a sudden, the Bitcoin use case for them is put all your money on your private key, put it in your brain, and walk across the border, right? Something you can't do with gold.
Wow.
You can't transact bank money out of the country. The bank's going to stop it, government's going to stop it, whatever. You could look on the other end of the spectrum. A super rich billionaire, right, that is living in a jurisdiction where maybe wokeism has taken an extra strong hold, and there's going to be some wealth redistribution schemes coming down the pipe soon, which always means, typically when we get to this point in society where it's dividing itself, often the bottom strata will start to vote itself authority over the upper strata's wealth, and that's wealth redistribution. It's theft on theft. Well, as a super rich billionaire guy, he might decide, I'm going to put my wealth in something they can't steal or they can't touch, or I'm going to go elsewhere, right? Similar to the person in hyperinflation, like similar move, obviously very different circumstances, but it speaks to this kind of common denominator that if you want an asset that you can actually own and control, and one that credibly cannot be stolen from you or inflated, well, there might be only one choice. And so my general thesis is that as the world becomes more divisive, there's more pain, there's more warfare, there's more coercion, theft, people are going to be, the option value of Bitcoin, it's never forced on you, as you said earlier, it's always opt-in, but the option value of Bitcoin, holding money that you can do anything with and no one can steal from you, goes parabolic. And that's what I think, it's like an osmotic pressure that pushes people into it over time.
So what are some of the haters saying? I mean, they don't believe that it's a long-lasting, viable option. What happens if your Bitcoin is connected to you, mm-hmm. and you die, and you die with your keys? Mm. Does that Bitcoin get taken out of the market?
Well, if it's just you and one brain wallet, then yeah, it's gone. Bitcoin, effectively, you'd be taking Bitcoin out of the supply, which would be like anti-inflation or anti-dilution. So everyone else's Bitcoin would be that much more precious as a result. And that's indeed happened. There's like 3 to 5 million lost coins today that will supposedly never move again. People have lost hard drives and whatever. Back when it was a joke, right? People would mine 100,000 Bitcoin and then forget they had the hard drive. And then 10 years later, they're like spending millions of dollars digging through landfills trying to find their hard drive.
Is that
there's a lot of stories out there like that.
Digging through landfills? That's
there's 100,000 Bitcoin on the line. You might be digging through the landfill.
Wow.
You asked about the haters though, and I mean, the haters say everything. I mean, they call Bitcoin tulips, a bubble, Ponzi scheme. Oh, one you said earlier, tools are amoral, right? It's the moral intent of the actor using the tool. Yet they're always blaming Bitcoin for being used by drug traffickers. Right. It's like, what is the fucking US dollar used for? Like, right. You can't, that doesn't, like, that argument holds no water. But it is repeated in mainstream media. It's repeated. Only drug traffickers use Bitcoin. It's right. Like, you're not saying anything. But,
yeah, I mean, the government is so proud of themselves when they seize assets from drug dealers, or they come in and they feel like they're doing the moral thing by controlling the money because they're getting the bad guys.
Yeah.
But you forget how fundamentally amoral that in and of itself is.
Yeah.
If that's how you deal with criminals, if you can't inspire them to, walk the moral road in other ways, then it becomes, just like you said, this cyclical, moral hot potato.
Yeah, and that's human history in a nutshell. I take a much dimmer view of government overall. Like, we have that general notion that it's the moral institution that's trying to do the right thing, but I'm like, no, it's the most organized form of crime in the world. It's like it's legitimized itself via these institutional structures, so it can make its theft regular and systemic, and it conditions people into accepting it. Like, oftentimes in arguments on Twitter, and there's people saying, oh no, taxation and inflation are not theft. And I'm like, oh, these are the victims of that inflation. And like I was talking about the survival podcast guy earlier, they're sort of being domesticated to protect their masters. Like, when I speak out about the masters that are extracting from them, I'm just observing how the thing works mechanically. I'm not really putting a lot of opinion on it. I mean, I guess you could argue that it's my interpretation, but there's a lot of economic history about this interpretation. I didn't make it up. There's hundreds of years of Austrian economics and libertarian philosophy talking about this very thing the state is organized crime, taxation is theft. Like, it's all true. If you can't say no to it, what else do you call it? And that's a weird thing to consider, because now you're like, are humans supposed to domesticate other humans? Is that a thing? Should that be a thing? I don't think so. But when I see people that are domesticated...
Is there a role for government? I mean do you want
the preservation of life, liberty, and property. That's all they should do. That's what King John signed on the Magna Carta in 1215. Life, liberty, inviolable property. Anything government does beyond the scope of that is beyond the intent of government.
I mean, at a certain point, the banks did serve a purpose, right? I mean, to have somebody actually...
The gold-backed currency we talked about earlier, that was because of banks. We put all the gold in the bank, they issue the currency on top of it, we get portable money.
Right, so, but now they become obsolete, because now we have digital gold, and they become so
corrupt prior to even digital gold.
Right.
Yeah.
So now we need to dismantle, do away with them, and of course also centralized systems aren't trustworthy. I mean, you look at the way during COVID, how unstable everybody really was, just nearly making it out of that. Another reason why I'm deciding to do the homesteading thing. It's like, okay, if I can't trust the banks, if I can't trust centralized food distribution systems, can I continue to bring in more responsibility, more value, and store it here for my friends, my family?
Being self-sovereign.
Self-sovereign.
So,
So let's get back into that. Like, is there a way I can use Bitcoin more locally, not just as a store of value, but using sats? What is a sat, first of all? And is it Bitcoin plus other technologies to be able to transfer small amounts of Bitcoin in real exchange markets, or am I just using Bitcoin here on the land? And is there, how would you suggest I best use crypto here as a homesteader with a small community so that we can retain as much value here on the land and trade amongst ourselves using crypto or Bitcoin so that we're not going through the middlemen or the government as much as possible?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my first caveat is I don't know much about your operation, so I wouldn't feel qualified to give you an answer of like, here's the best thing you should do, but I can make some suggestions based on what I do know. And a sat, as you mentioned earlier, that's the subunit of Bitcoin. So it's 1/100 millionth of a Bitcoin. So one Bitcoin is 100 million sats. And that is the denomination that Bitcoin maximalists think the world is headed towards at some point. So again, we talked about that unit of account. We all think in dollars today, right? Like, you think in dollars. That's interesting, right? We have this language. It's internal, it's psychological, but it's also interpersonal. It wires the world economy together. It gives us the pricing system. Like, imagine switching, right? Switching to a new software almost. So it's kind of radical when you think of it that way. The Lightning Network, which is a layer 2 technology on top of Bitcoin, makes Bitcoin very usable as a medium of exchange, because one of the trade-offs it makes at layer 1 is that the Bitcoin network is very inefficient, actually. It's super redundant. You have all of these nodes running the same software, keeping the same record of the transaction history, and you have all these miners competing to solve a puzzle with one another and all checking each other's work. So it's a giant network of redundancy, which means it's really slow, but it does this one thing really amazing. Like, it keeps enforcing the rules it set out to enforce. So 21 million Bitcoin, one block every 10 minutes. And it's really hard to break. Like, no one knows how to break it, actually. It's the most secure computing network in human history. So that's good for layer 1, but there's a problem because I can't, like gold, right? We needed to abstract gold into paper to make it fast and transactable. We need to do something similar with Bitcoin, and that's what Lightning Network is. So Lightning Network lets you transact in Bitcoin, not on the base layer, but on one layer above it. You're giving up some of the trust minimized properties of layer 1. On layer 2, you're actually trusting the software. Maybe you're trusting some intermediaries. You don't have to. You can run your own Lightning node and whatnot. but you might be using an app that's a Lightning app, a Lightning wallet, etc. So you give up a little bit of trust minimization, but you pick up a lot of speed. You can move the money super fast anywhere in the world. So I don't know how much transactions you guys are doing around here.
Well, I think you're talking generally enough. I mean, I essentially want to trade with my friends and not have to, go through, our conventional banking system.
Yeah, so you download Moon Wallet today. MWN, I think is how you spell it. I have it on my phone. It's a open source wallet, so you control the private keys to it. You put Bitcoin on it. Anyone else that downloads the wallet as well can invoice you in Lightning, and you just hit pay. You can either scan the invoice, or you can copy and paste the invoice code, and you hit pay and send, and it's done. You transact with anyone globally.
Right, but you're first transferring Bitcoin to the wallet, right?
You do need to get Bitcoin from layer 1 into that wallet. Right. And so there's a little bit of a learning curve there, but it's really just copying and pasting an alphanumeric string that is an address into whatever you're handling your Bitcoin with and sending it to that address. So it's no more difficult than sending an email.
Right. Yeah. So the comparison would be transferring money from your bank account or entering your bank account into your Venmo wallet.
Yes.
Right. And now
exactly.
the Venmo is extracting from your bank account digitally.
Right.
But instead, in this case, you're using Moon to extract from your Bitcoin, which you own, which you control.
Yeah.
So you are the bank.
You're sending UTXOs to the Moon wallet, but you also control the Moon wallet because you have the private keys. You own the wallet, basically. It's a non-custodial wallet, so you're not sending it to anyone else.
Right. So it's not just so Venmo would. They're taking your
Venmo
money.
holds your money. Your bank holds your money.
And they use that money how they will.
This is a key point too, by the way. We get very complacent logging into online banking and seeing the big numbers and feeling like, oh, I'm good. Those numbers are not yours.
No.
It's not yours. Read the fine print. It's a creditor-debtor relationship. So that's just money the bank owes you. They don't ever have to actually give that to you. And if you're a trucker in Canada, you may have experienced that recently, that creditor-debtor relationship falling apart. Mm-hmm. So one other caveat with Bitcoin though, unlike Venmo or your bank or whatever else, if you mess up and send it to the wrong place, maybe your bank or Venmo or whoever can reverse the transaction and change it. But with Bitcoin, great power comes with great responsibility. Mm-hmm. You send it to the wrong address, there is no Bitcoin CEO or customer hotline.
Right. There's no
it's
mommy.
Gone.
There's
gone.
No mommy to come save you.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've had the sweaty palm moment where I'm like hitting send and I'm like, I think I did it all right.
Yes.
There we go. Yeah.
The last thing I would say, because you asked about crypto too, and this is my view. I could be wrong. But there's this, how we treat every gun as if it's loaded? Like, every gun's not loaded, but you always point it away from people, always point it away from yourself. It's just a really good live action role playing strategy, right? To not shoot yourself or someone. It's a useful fiction, basically, that helps people stay safe. I think saying all crypto is a scam is an equally useful fiction. Like, I don't know that all crypto is actually a scam. It's pretty empirically proven at this point that the vast majority have been scam or scammy. Maybe that's not all of them, but I think it's a useful fiction to just put that whole space in a bucket and ignore it as if it were a scam and just focus on Bitcoin, honestly. There's definitively one colossal innovation in this space that promises to eat the market for money. Like, it's mind-blowing in its implications. As someone that's been studying Bitcoin full-time for like 6 years now, and I have more questions than ever, I can tell you, it is an inexhaustible teacher, to say the least. All the other stuff is like a copy and paste of that, trying to do some other version, but they're not decentralized. None of it's decentralized. They're all controlled by people. And Bitcoin's key property is
the FTX thing. Yes. Right? I mean, so FTX collapsed because essentially people were just putting their faith in yet another bank.
Another guy.
Right, another custodian, and they weren't taking the responsibility. So they wanted
another shitcoin, that FTT token that was pumping the whole thing. Right. People were putting faith in that shitcoin. Sorry, that's the endearing term we use for everything that's not Bitcoin.
Yeah, yeah. I have become more and more of a Bitcoin maximalist, I think.
Yeah,
if I understand
we all
what that
do.
means.
We all do.
And I have so many shit coins. They're just like like just leave it in Coinbase.
You might as well sell it and turn it into sats and get it over with.
Yeah,
Just get the Band-Aid off. I think I used to trade shitcoins, obviously,
Would
in
you
the
say
fund.
Ethereum as well?
Yes.
Shitcoin.
Ethereum.
Don't say it, man.
Ethereum's a shitcoin, and Ethereum, I have some sentimental value with Ethereum because it's what brought me in, like the concept of smart contracts and all this. So it was like I had, I don't know, an affinity for it, you might say, but again, not decentralized.
Right.
The goalposts are moving all the time. There's been no product market fit other than creating more shitcoins. So it's
right. I mean,
it's a failure to
I'm
date.
still struggling to understand what the fuck a smart contract is. Like, isn't that just called a contract? Like, I mean, what's a smart contract, and who's you ultimately need a lawyer to create that smart contract, right? I mean, where are these smart contracts
don't need a lawyer.
coming from,
You
though?
don't need a lawyer to create a smart contract. You can actually write it in code. And so this is.
You gotta fucking learn how to write code.
I'm
So
gonna
how's this practical?
I'm going to try to.
You need somebody who knows the code, who's another third party, and then you're back to square one.
So again, Nick Szabo's work. He has a great piece, I think titled just "Smart Contracts" in the late '90s. Excuse me. When I read that. This is 2017, I guess, 16, probably 16. I read that piece he had written in the late 1990s describing the usefulness of smart contracts, and that was my light bulb moment with crypto. So this is an analogy that hopefully lands. He uses the analogy of the vending machine. So a smart contract is anything that automates a relationship between buyers and sellers. So the vending machine. A producer put a bunch of candy in that thing, and then they coded it, right? And said D8, 75 cents. If customer puts in 75 cents and presses D8, he gets an Almond Joy, right? The guy didn't have to be there to facilitate the trade. He built a machine that does it for him, so he's economizing his efforts, right? It's a tool. Smart contracts are like a vending machine in that you can create terms of an agreement. Now, the terms have to be objectively discernible for a smart contract to work. Like it can't be design a cool house for me.
Yeah,
right.
You're fucked with cool.
Right. Yes, you're fucked with cool. You're fucked. You know, the aesthetic, subjective, artistic domain doesn't work so well with smart contracts. There's more things to say about that, but we'll just leave that as. It has to be pretty objective. Like, did the price of Apple stock exceed $3,000 on Wednesday, June 17th? Right. That's something that. This contract can go to the web and determine. And this piece of software called a smart contract, with the advent of things like Bitcoin, with digital money, you can actually put money into this contract. And so we could make a bet about that price of Apple being above or below that price. We both make the bet, we both put money in the contract. Whatever plays out, that the code of that contract rules. It rules independent of you or me or any legal framework in the world, and that money would be released based on that outcome. So that's one micro example of how you can automate. But here was my light bulb moment. I think in the US, the finance industry is about 10% of GDP. It might be around that globally, I'm not sure, but it's a massive portion of the world economy, right? The whole finance industry is nothing more than a smart contract. What is finance doing? They're just connecting buyers and sellers, borrowers and lenders, capital and labor. Like, it's an intermediate function that we use a ton of people, very well-paid Wall Street executives and others to facilitate right now. Well, this software could potentially wipe out a lot of that waste.
If we didn't need a third party to tell us how it works, I mean,
exactly.
I would love to do it here, but any usefulness that I would get out of it would be like the intangible, cool factors, right? I need people to come in and bring their energy and their ideas and their creativity. So, I mean, and then environmentally, right? As an environmentalist, a lot of the promises of these green coins that are gonna, you put in some money and like it makes everything green because it's built into the contract. It's necessarily more sustainable. Well, what the fuck does sustainable mean, right? So,
yeah.
that's one of the promise of all of these coins, is that you get all this value, and it's intangible value, and we collectively come together to heal the world and make things cool. But it's not true.
Yeah. Well, welcome to crypto. It's basically all not true except Bitcoin.
Right. So one thing that I've been trying to crack here is, how do I invite people into what we're doing here, which is a nature-based lifestyle community with retreats and experiences and homesteading and farming and growing things, so that people can, through a crypto exchange or a Bitcoin exchange, participate and support the projects here while being able to take something with them. It's, imagine like a farm stand, a honor box. You see the honor boxes.
No, what's honor box?
So like on the you often
the books?
see them. No, you often see them at farms. They'll have a box of apples.
Oh. Okay.
And then there'll be a little bin or a tin.
Oh.
And you take an apple and you put in 5 cents.
Yeah. Right.
Right. So there's no contract, but it's just, I guess the presupposition, the assumption is you're going to do the honorable thing.
Right.
So how can we use crypto so that we can make those exchanges and get people to participate and bring their energy here and also feel like they are part of this community?
Yeah.
Which is why NFTs were attractive to me.
Yeah, they definitely played the stylish element a lot. And they seem cool. Like, again, a lot of, what's that saying? A rancher that has all hat and no cattle. Like, they look really good on the surface, but there's no substance there. But this.
Shit,
so,
I hope you're not talking to me.
No. I'm talking about NFTs.
No, I know. Okay, good.
NFTs are all hat and no cattle.
Yeah.
This honor box thing, though, so that works, and that's amazing on like a local communal level, right? Like, whoever is within driving distance of this honor box, like, it probably works. Like, I'm sure people don't cheat it that much, or maybe a very small percentage, so it doesn't matter. But put that honor box on the internet or something. Do you think that would work? Like, no. All your apples are going to be gone. You're going to have $0 in your fucking box. That's what's going to happen. So there's this scale. As we scale up human interaction, we have to change the way we think about how we interact, right? The honor box works great here.
Yeah, I wonder why that is. I mean, does it have something to do with, like, you feel like you might be seen by somebody in the neighborhood?
Isn't it kind of, this technology is kind of dehumanizing, or not dehumanizing, depersonalizing in a way, right? It's the same reason people will say stuff on Twitter that they would never say to a person's face. There's just that, I guess the veil of the screen and maybe some anonymity in there too just brings out the darker side of humans. But that's the honor box. To your larger question about how to get people here and cultivate some energy and get people bring their talents and skills and whatnot, I think you, sir, are a natural fit for the Bitcoin maximalist community. So what all these people are into is regenerative farming, traditional values, Paleolithic diets. People that think outside the box, they're entrepreneurial. I mean, that appears to be kind of a counter movement that's already occurring inside of Bitcoin. Like, people are leaving cities, leaving their jobs.
Does Bitcoin facilitate that in some way? Or is that just, these are cool humans that are doing cool things?
Something's happening.
Bitcoin is the way they interact.
Theories abound with this. No one understands, and I'll probably offer some more theories that I don't necessarily understand. But for some reason, people that engage deeply and seriously with Bitcoin all seem to experience some form of transformation in their life. It's all different, but the general flavor is lower time preference, right? Which means longer term orientation. So people are getting in shape. People are changing their diet. People are getting married, focusing on family, getting more integrated in their communities, returning to religious values, traditional values, studying history, traveling the world, like non-consumerist, minimalist.
And these are Bitcoiners?
These are Bitcoiners.
So is there a study? I mean, have they studied a cross-section of Bitcoiners and found that they're healthier, they're more grounded?
I would say this is
their
just...
relationships last longer?
No, I think the experiment is being played out in real time. It's just a social experiment. But interacting with this community closely over 5 years, it's weird that people seem to keep coming back to the same things. It's like it brought me into the work of Jordan Peterson, for instance, which kind of got me back to my Christian upbringing. That's my own little path, my own existence. But there's other people all over the world describing the same kind of thing, how they had moved away from a traditional value system that they grew up with, and now they're returning to it, and they don't know why. They just went through the Bitcoin rabbit hole. No, it's kind of like the illusion thing. Once you see through the dollar, you're like, oh, we don't need to eat what we've been told to eat. We don't need the education that we've been told to have. The money sucks pretty bad too. Like, what? Now that these aren't the answer, these things I've taken for granted, what are the answers? Yeah. And maybe that's it.
It's almost like a whole rejection of a consumerist, indulgent.
Yes, fiat lifestyle, we would call it.
Yeah, is that
Yeah.
It's
fiat food, fiat medicine, fiat education.
Right. It's consumptive. It's indulgent. It's pleasure seeking. Mm-hmm. It's boundaryless. It's
short-termism, not thinking about the future, taking on a bunch of debt and spending and eating today.
Skirting responsibility, letting someone else do the dirty work.
And we're back to that corruption thing, right?
Right. And
the corrupt money is corrupting the humans.
Yeah. And it's you see it in fast fashion. You see it with child labor around the world. You see it with our cell phones and our
Art Basel, Miami, a banana duct taped to a canvas. If that's not fiat art, I don't know what is.
Wow. Yeah, this is interesting. So, let that be a lesson to you out there. All of you homesteaders, all of you trying to get closer to nature, consider diving a little bit deeper into Bitcoin, because there's going to be a fundamental aspect of your deeper nature that I think will come back into presence, because I think there's a lot of stuff that we've forgotten that we're remembering. That we willfully sort of allowed ourselves to forget, and now it's coming back in all these ways.
Murray Rothbard, I think I mentioned him earlier, American libertarian philosopher and an Austrian economist. He has several great books. One for new people that don't know anything about any of this, just as an aside, he has a great 20-page book called What Has Government Done to Our Money? And it just, in 20 pages, goes soup to nuts. What is money? Why government money is bad. It's a great read. A longer book he wrote is called The Ethics of Liberty. And he has a chapter in that book titled, I think, Conservation on the Free Market. And he describes, I guess I'll just tell you the punchline first and then try to back into the description of it. And I hope I can do a good job. His argument is that the only way to incentivize ecological preservation in the world is through privatizing everything, making everything private property. Mm-hmm. And the argument here is that when you are a proprietor, an owner of private property, you have the incentive both to, well, first of all, you have the exclusive rights to the thing. That's the benefit to you, right? You own the farm, you get all the yield, the crops, you own all that, you can sell it, you can eat it, whatever. But simultaneously with all those rights that you enjoy in your private property, you simultaneously have responsibilities. You have to upkeep the property, you have to maintain it, you have to take care of it, because you care about it existing over time because it feeds you or benefits you somehow. So in the world at large, we have giant pieces of territory that are not privately owned, they're publicly owned. And he uses the example of fisheries, which I'm not going to be able to speak intelligently to because I can't recall exactly how he did it. But I guess the punchline would be that if you want people to take care of something, like we want people to take care of the environment, then you need to give them some interest in that. They need to have skin in the game, basically. And such that if you decide it's profitable for your factory to go, instead of putting the pollution through some expensive refinement process that's good for the environment, you said, oh, well, we could just save the 5% and dump it in the river over here. So you'd be adding to your profit margin at the expense of the river. Well, if that river is privately owned, then all of a sudden, if we have a functional legal system, well, now I can sue you. And I can say, hey, man, you put your pollution in my river, that was a violation of my property, you owe me some money. I can litigate you for that. And that assumes basically the river has been privatized and owned. So now you, as the would-be polluter, are going to impute that into your cost structure and the risk reward of dumping it in the river versus doing it properly. So now what we've done is just by increasing the, granularity and integrity of private property rights, I mean everything, like privatizing the oceans, the whole thing, that you would have this relationship where people could hold each other honest via the legal system. And we don't have that today, right?
It's a tragedy of the commons.
Yes, it resolves the tragedy of the commons.
Yeah,
exactly.
well, and technically, people don't know this, but talking about the oceans, we do own the oceans.
Right.
So nobody owns it, so therefore it's all our collective property. But we don't have a sense of that.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't feel like we own it. We don't have the connection to that.
Right.
In fact, what we were doing at Lonely Well, our whole mission was really to connect people into their relationship to the ocean, so they have that sense of ownership, and they feel like they want to do something. Because if it's out of sight, out of mind, you can't care about it. It's like just not even part of your everyday experience. And I was actually looking at technology as a way to bring people closer and to give them a sense of ownership by adopting a drop of the ocean. Like if you were to divide the entirety of all the water in the ocean into however many bazillion drops, right, or little small portions, spots of the ocean, and then you gave people the opportunity to adopt that drop, and then you use technology to bring it into their home or onto their smartphone so that they can retrieve data, they can retrieve, images, underwater images or satellite images, and just using all the different technology that we have to instrument the ocean, and people are using it. You could tap into transponder data from ships, right, and you can watch them passing through your little spot of the ocean.
That's cool.
And then you have something, you can act upon that, right? You can work to protect or to participate with that piece of ocean. But I think that there's something to that. It's theoretical, obviously, but someone should own it. Someone should be incentivized to take care of it. Right now, there's no incentive. It's too expensive to go police it. So you have pirates and you have bad actors around the world who are just exploiting it without any consequence.
Right. Yeah. I think Aristotle maybe, when everyone owns everything, no one takes care of anything. And so, again, it's back to that material incentive thing. It's just create an incentive structure where people are induced to take care of the thing. Right? You can't just, the legislation doesn't work. It's not enough.
Yeah, I've been frustrated with that.
It doesn't do anything, because inside the legislative body, right, there's all these incentives being pulled around, and it's follow the money and you follow the outcome typically. So,
well, it's just talk and it's threats until you actually get up and do something, until you pick up a gun and send military or police to actually retaliate in some way. We would have to go to war with Japan and China for what they do to the oceans. If we were to do something about it.
Yeah, no, you're right, because the international pirates thing brings up a larger issue, right? Like the largest commons, the oceans. It's not enough that we just do that in this country. We'd have to convince the entire world. So it'd either be war, or, I guess more optimistically, some type of global awakening. My optimistic Bitcoin perspective would be Bitcoin's going to defund nation states over time. So states will be a less relevant force in our lives, and we'll be more free to self-organize. So then maybe we can have structures like this where we say, hey, why don't we just privatize everything? Because that makes sense, and that's how we optimally preserve the environment.
Yeah, I mean, having done environmental work for 20 years and really believing that if we all just got together and we got the government to legislate, things will get better.
It's not legislation, yeah.
But again, it's like you were saying, you're just giving over your power.
Yes.
You're recognizing the government as having the
Right.
authority and the ability.
Yes.
And on some real subconscious level, you're not the one who's empowered.
That's a
to do
great point.
anything.
That's a great point.
So right now, my environmental momentum is going around, how do I become the steward of my environment, and how do I take total responsibility for my life and what I can see first and foremost. And I realized like I was eating food and like soapboxing farmers for not doing the right thing or using pesticides or GMO or Monsanto or whatever, and I had no ability to do it myself.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another reason why I moved here, so that I recognized that if you want to heal the earth, first you have to heal yourself,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then become a participant in stewarding and healing the earth, not looking to big government or looking to
Yes.
businesses to do the right thing, because everybody's wagging their finger.
Uh-huh.
And you have the Greta Thunberg, the Greta Thunbergification of environmentalism, where it's all about complaining and cynically,
How dare you? And all that. Right.
self-righteous and sanctimonious soapboxing
Yes.
versus go fucking do something,
Right.
and recognize how hard it is.
Yes.
And if you have a solution, great. And if you don't, go figure one out.
Yes.
Because all these fucking leaders, they don't know what the fuck to do.
Right.
You
That's
know?
what-
They
yeah.
just want to stay in power because it's their job and that's like how they make a living, and they like to feel important. So,
And I'm with you on all of that. I hate even calling them leaders. I'm sure as the hell not being led by them. I hope other people aren't either. But this is the political class subsists off the stolen proceeds from those that are taking action, those that do get up and go to work and produce goods and services and houses and all the things that we enjoy. Statists live off of that. They're just it's a parasite-host relationship. So I think there's a very good reason why you get this. I forgot the soapboxing out. That's sanctimonious soapboxing.
yeah.
It's just all bullshit. It's all fucking bullshit. Most of these politicians have never had a real job. They've never run a business and known the struggles of an entrepreneur. And it's rhetoric over action. And that's the opposite of what we need, right? We need as little rhetoric and bullshitting as possible if we're going to be honest with ourselves and one another and the environment that we inhabit, and figure out how do we go into this really complicated world and create it in a way that supports human flourishing, but simultaneously preserves ecology across time. Because if you don't preserve the ecology across time, you're toast.
Well, I don't know if you've looked into like spiral dynamics or
I've read a little bit, yeah.
or integral Zen, but there's stages of development, and we're always going back and forth between very personal and sort of self, and looking like egalitarian and populist perspectives, and then like very personal individual responsibility perspectives. And I feel like where I am personally, I'm like, okay, I need to take full responsibility for everything before I start telling other people how to live their lives. The Jordan Peterson clean your room. By the way, I coined that clean your room before he did, and I have proof, but that's okay, we can share. So yeah, like right now I'm just like all about what can I do for myself and my family in a very localized way before I start telling other people how to live their lives or how to be environmentally friendly, whatever the fuck that means, right?
Right.
And I would like to see more of that happen, where people aren't looking to globalization or give peace a chance in the whole entire world, or we're going to go muck around in other people's business around the world and get involved with Ukraine or anything else. Like, can we please deal with our own stuff right here?
Yes.
And what are you doing in your own home?
Right.
And how are you eating? And are you exercising? And have you given up plastic yet? and now you're complaining about the oceans having plastic, and yet you know you can't go 5 minutes with a little bit of thirst before you buy something to drink in a plastic bottle.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm definitely. It's been strange as an environmentalist, as a UN Environment Ambassador, as somebody who's asked to speak often on these topics, and I find myself on stages in interviews with people who are expecting me to have a certain answer, to sort of just continue the same rhetoric.
The party line,
and I just can't do it anymore.
Wow.
And it's awkward at times.
Yeah.
It's awkward to sit in front of people who have a certain mentality, and they're outraged at business for not doing this, or billionaires for not giving up their money, or it's like, well, how would you give up all your money? Like, in what ways? Who would you give it to?
Right.
And what would you use $1 billion for?
Yeah.
And how would that fix anything?
Yes.
And so it's.
I would love to send you that chapter that I mentioned, Conservation on the Free Market, that might just give you. There's a lot more written about it, but I think there's something too. I mean, property solves a lot of other problems. Like we talked about the morality issue earlier, right? If you have really strong property, you're not going to get that wave of inflation that induces the winemaker to start questioning if he should be moral or pursue his own interests. It wouldn't surprise me, going deeper on this issue, if strong property weren't the answer to environmentalism.
Well, I like the idea. The only problem that I have with this thinking is ultimately we see things as what is valuable to us in the immediate term.
Yeah.
We have a hard time seeing the complexity of how nature works and the hidden value, the hidden economic value of all the systems and all the complex elements that go into a natural system that creates the value that we take for granted. Every time you breathe a breath, you can thank the ocean.
Yes, right.
And we're not looking to invest in that because we've had it for free for so long.
Right.
The bees are working their ass off to pollinate our crops.
Right.
And they don't send us a bill.
Right.
They don't send us an invoice.
Yeah.
So that's why ownership, yes, taking ownership for sure. If it's not a contractual thing or it's not official, you can take ownership whether or not you actually own something. But ultimately, going back to the spirit of the user, if you don't do that deep interpersonal spiritual work, then you're not going to recognize the real value that you're protecting or that you're creating with that that value exchange that you're giving and taking from the earth.
Yes.
Right, because you're part of that, and that system is also has a role to play.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. It's the ultimate. It's everything, right? Without it, we're nothing. And I think it's a great point that we participate in these webs of exchange that there's not a lot of accounting for, right? Like the plastic is dumped into the ocean, or we're interfering with bees. And Peterson's talked about this a bit in his UN projects, but apparently when GDP per capita gets above a certain level, people tend to be more environmentally conscious, which makes a lot of sense, right? Once your basic needs are met, then you can turn your attention to other things.
And you want to continue your nice life, so you want the earth to be around, and you want to enjoy it.
Right, right.
When you have nothing to live for, you're like, fuck it, I don't care.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that time preference thing again. And if we just get governments out of people's pockets, then everyone will be a lot richer and then presumably more environmentally conscious. I'm not saying that's the answer, but I mean, heck, that's a nice start, isn't it? Let's just increase GDP per capita.
Right. Well, the scary thing I think is a real threat is what happens. Let's say our government got out of our pockets, and then we had another country that decided to, oh look, they don't have a government that's organized militarily. Yeah. We're just gonna come in and take their stuff. So it would have to be the entire world's population doing this at the same time.
It has to be a brand new incentive system. undermining the existing institutional framework. That's what
En masse.
That's what Bitcoin is.
And you think Bitcoin will level the playing field across all humans around the...
Well, I mean, the closest thing we may ever have to a level playing field. I don't know that it's... I'm no utopian person. I think we're always going to have problems. But we've gotten better over time, overall, right? We're not in ancient Egypt ruled by pharaoh god kings. We have more individual sovereignty today than we've ever had. I think.
Well, and also Bitcoin gives people with shared values, despite where they live, you know, not constrained by
space
the physical
and time,
land
yeah.
space, to actually exchange. So to make, to exchange values. So you have people in a totally different country working with. So you actually can. You don't need the government.
No, you don't. I mean, look, government, again, the defense of life, liberty, and property. So to whatever extent we need government, that's what we need it for. Bitcoin protects one form of property, which is money, in a way that the government is not necessary. We still need local protection for things. But the general theme is that Bitcoin would defund large centralized national government, federal government, would defund that to a large extent. So we'd have a relocalization of government, which is what it was.
Well, I'm just thinking
intended to be.
military. Like, how do we protect ourselves from
Well, that's what I'm saying. This would happen globally, though.
all at the same time?
Yeah, it's sucking. Well, not all at the same time. It's even and uneven, but it's governments derive all the revenues from theft. People don't like to be robbed. So over time, people will hold the money that you can't rob them through. This contracts government revenues. So inflation and taxation come down. What happens when your business declines in revenues? Does it shrink?
Yeah.
That's what Bitcoin's doing to government.
Right, and if you can't use military to go steal other people's
It's a bad investment.
booty, money, because they have Bitcoin, there's nothing to steal. You can't
Bitcoin
actually steal.
incentivizes honest and peaceful cooperation, and it defunds the war machine.
And you're not an idealist.
Maybe I am. But we created something that itself is not corruptible. Maybe we created an ideal. Plato talked about this a lot, like the difference between the relative and the absolute, and how we could never be the absolute or touch the absolute. We can always aspire towards it. But then Bitcoin, we actually created something that has an absolute fixed supply. It's like the only absolute technology humans have ever created. We've created something that never changes. And the implications of that are hard to imagine.
Okay, let's go. I'm in.
You want a bunch of nature-loving, interesting people on your land here. I think you just need to have a Bitcoin Maxi event and see where it goes. I was just at Pacific Bitcoin Conference in LA, and what you were describing, where people can come together under common values, that's what it is with Bitcoiners. Like, you show up, and you just, if they're a Bitcoiner, you're already about truth and self-sovereignty and responsibility and hard work and freedom. Like, we know, like, I automatically know that about you. So people from other countries all gathering at this one event, it's a love fest. It's an absolute love fest. And that's with Bitcoin price in the absolute shitter, right? It was going through, Bitcoin price has been pummeled during this conference. I didn't hear one peep, one worry, no one was concerned. It's fascinating.
So when are you moving in?
Is that the invite?
Yeah, man. Like the invite has been put out to the world.
Can I be co-cult leader?
Well, I can't let you take my. No, of course. There's the thing is, there's no cult leader here.
There's no cult leaders in Bitcoin. Just one big cult with no leaders.
Yeah, that's one thing that I realized we had to solve for is how do we create full transparency with everybody who owns a piece of this? Because I recognize I'm an early mover. I bought this place. So anybody who comes in, I can charge them whatever I want and profit off of.
As you should.
Well, but I want to be transparent about it.
You should.
I want to say, look, this is what I spent.
Yeah.
This is the time I put into it. So now you're coming in with your energy, your Bitcoin, and
Yeah.
so we'll have a more even exchange as opposed to me just gouging. And the first act of becoming a community is me ripping you off. Right. So how do we use blockchain technology? How do we use a ledger for full transparency so that everybody sees?
Well, you can be transparent without a blockchain. I mean, you can do as much of your transactional activity as you want on Bitcoin. That's a useful thing, perhaps, depending on what you're doing. But you can be transparent without anything else. You just publish your financials. But there's a lot of people, my friend Peter McCormick, who runs one of the biggest Bitcoin podcasts, he publishes his monthly financials on his website. Just shows total sponsor revenue, expenses. Not the detail, but I think it's, revenue, expenses, profit. And so you don't need, blockchain, I don't think it's not even a word. Bitcoin's a time chain. Blockchain's like this weird marketing buzzword that the rest of the world picked up and thinks is a thing now. It's nothing.
Okay.
Do you remember, I don't know, there were so many weird things people were calling the internet when it first came out. It was like information superhighway. We had these intranets for a while, and then all of it just went away and we call it the internet. I think that's basically what we're going through now.
Right. Well, I guess I am also quite seduced by the romance of having this thing that just works and I don't have to do anything, but at the end of the day, I still have to just do it.
Yeah, that doesn't exist either.
Right.
But I think just putting the emphasis on Bitcoin alone and attracting that community will bring the right energy and talent and stuff. Look, maybe I'm just drink too much of the Kool-Aid coming fresh off this conference, but it just seems like a match. Like you're looking for people that are looking for that type of lifestyle, and that's what's emergent in the Bitcoin community.
They have to be Bitcoin maximalists.
Yeah, I mean,
otherwise, they could be shady.
You got to be careful with the shitcoiners. That's for sure.
Okay.
And we've all shitcoined, by the way. This isn't class warfare. It's like almost every Bitcoin maximalist went through their shitcoin phase and then repented and came back. So it's learning through the pain, which we're all doing, I guess.
Robert, thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. This is awesome.
Now you say it to me, and that way then it'll be your interview.
Adrian, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
The magic comes out in the edit.
Yep, the 2 for 1. Great.
Well, you could introduce me and then talk the whole time. That would be fun.
Just be the asshole host.
Yeah, we got some good stuff with you, and that whole last half hour was